I'm 23 years old right now. I think at some point it's going to click here in the very near future where I think I'm just going to
Mm.
skyrocket and just take over.
You're doing a lot better than most 23-year-olds, that's for sure. Uh,
Thank you.
yeah, you seem to be more knowledgeable than a lot of people even doing YouTube videos. Hey guys, today we've got one of the latest and up and coming and most popular streamers out today. He's already gone viral with a video with over 500,000 views, and he's the creator of Next Gen Poker, the Next Gen Poker show, where him and his friends are bringing you along to show how they become rich and show all their mistakes and whatever other crazy stuff they're up to. Frank Cucciara.
Yeah, nice. Thank you so much for the introduction. Okay. Yeah, Jungleman, right. It's Frankie C to make it easy. That's why I don't have Frankie Cucciara in there. But yeah, thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate it and happy to be here.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the show, a little bit about yourself, actually, because even I mean, I know a little bit about you. I know that you're a poker vlogger and you're grinding it up, and you guys are on your way to becoming millionaires, or maybe you're already a millionaire. I don't know. Why don't you fill us in a little about with some background info?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the latter. Not quite there yet. I actually started Next Gen Poker, the YouTube channel, just because I really fell in love with poker while I was in college. I remember watching World Series of Poker as a kid on ESPN, but never really learned about the game until my first ever $10 cash game buy-in at my fraternity pool table. And that's where I met two of my best friends, who goes by Rosie and Jello. And we really just, the very first time we ever played poker at a casino at a 1-2 game, we're like, this is going to be interesting to film. As you know, a lot of the popular poker content creators, they're older, they're in their 30s, maybe 40s, which isn't old, but older than me. And I was like, okay, 21 years old. I think that'd be really cool to document my journey, show all the mistakes of being a brand new poker player, because I knew I wasn't the best player back then. And even now, as I've played for about 4 years at this point, I'm still not the best player, and I still think that the journey of all the mistakes, all the challenges, the losing, the tilting, all that could be told in a fun story. And I've always loved YouTube, and I thought YouTube was the best place to tell that story. And thankfully, my buddy Rosie had some video editing experience. So actually, just 3 years ago, we actually just hit our 3-year anniversary. We started this side hobby, and we called it the next generation of poker, Next Gen Poker for short. And this has kind of turned into what was a side hobby into my full-time gig. And I make all my money to pay the bills just from the YouTube sponsorships and really promoting all the media sources that I do. And then I play poker for fun, which I think that especially with parents who aren't as familiar with poker, I'm sure a lot of people can relate with that. Parents who don't want their kid who just graduated with a very nice engineering, very expensive engineering degree to go into being a full-time professional poker player. Well, I kind of have a different avenue, a different way to spin the story. And I can say, well, you know what I am? I'm a marketing specialist. I'm a content creator. I'm an influencer. And that's how I make my money. And then if things go well in the poker world, great. That's an extra bonus to my yearly income.
Cool. Well, you've kind of done kind of what I think would be a bit of the hard part. I would think that it's kind of hard to make quite a bit of money from YouTube to pay the bills. Like from my experience, I mean, it sounds like there's money on YouTube, but it's still quite top heavy. There's not a whole lot of it's not very much of an meritocracy. Whereas if you poker to be a lot closer to a meritocracy, it's, not as structurally, top heavy. But I would just think it's quite hard to make money from YouTubing enough to pay the bills, especially considering you have to pay people to do all this content. You got to figure it out, and you have to pay someone to edit, or you have to be a really good editor yourself. It's all this shit. Yeah. I can tell you, I'm not making any money from this. I'm a recreational YouTuber.
Well, let me elaborate a little bit on how making money as a YouTuber goes and the best way to go about it, because you can make YouTube videos and make absolutely no money, but you have to kind of put your entrepreneur hat on and kind of find the best ways to negotiate views into actual dollar signs. And just to put it point blank simple, only a few poker vloggers actually make what would be enough to make a full-time salary off YouTube views alone. And YouTube views is just the AdSense dollars that YouTube pays you to get a certain number of views. And I could probably name 4 creators that can do that: Brad, Andrew, Rampage, and Mariano, because the threshold that I think that's kind of the number that you need to hit is over 100,000 views per video. If you start getting over 100,000
Oh,
views per
really? Wow.
video, then you can start putting some money in your pocket to really pay some editors. And what we did to start, and what I would tell anyone that wants to start a YouTube channel, and it's slightly different for you since you're a very well-established poker player, I would have a little different advice to you than what I'm about to say. But to new people that want to start YouTube, you got to do it yourself, because the money's not going to come in immediately. It's not going to be profitable the first 6 months. Even if you're a really good storyteller, you got to go through the trials and tribulations. You got to learn how to give views and what the people want to see and the best way to market it. Because even if you have a good video, if you don't package it well, well, you're not going to get the views. And the views come 80% from a good title and thumbnail. So the way that I have leveraged Next Gen Poker's views into money is working with brand deals. And the big kind of aha moment for me, and the one that I was able to leave my engineering consulting full-time job to take this full-time, was a deal that I made with a local card room in Dallas, Texas. And they signed Next Gen Poker to be exclusive to their poker room in Dallas. It's a very competitive market.
Interesting.
And they said, we only want Next Gen Poker to film videos at our place. And if you do that, we'll give you this sum of money. And that was like, okay, yes, I could finally take this hobby of mine full time.
Okay, that's very interesting. It seems like so far you're actually kind of giving quite some advice to people who might want to be content creators rather than poker players. I mean, maybe you can give good advice for both, in fact, because you have a bit of experience on both avenues. I mean, I do think that becoming a YouTube star is like, maybe even a YouTube creator is kind of also now more and more of a viable option, with, you know, the workplace being flooded with people with degrees and it just being really hard to get like a real job with degrees. Like, I imagine even AI has been hurting like the engineering space and all that. It's very hard to get a job these days that's any good. And I do think a new avenue is really opening up for YouTube creators, especially if, you know, you can teach people to actually learn how to be entrepreneurs. That's a very powerful asset, because that's something that like can't really be replaced. I mean, you know, you can't really teach an AI to become an entrepreneur. I mean, not really. Like, I mean, a little bit maybe, but it's going to be a minute before that happens. And the whole thing that you said, I didn't know even that this was an option to become exclusive with a card room in Texas. Like, I had no idea this was an option. Do you want to talk more about how you're making money without getting like 100,000 views per video? Because that's a very high threshold.
Yeah, I guess let me go back to where Next Gen Poker kind of had, as the most blunt way to put it, but the way that my YouTube very successful friend put it, we had our erection, and that came from the first viral TikTok we ever posted, and it actually was, funnily enough, the first TikTok we ever posted. It was the very first poker video to be put in under 60-second format. Instead of posting the entire highlight of the session, we just posted one hand with pocket aces, posted at 8 p.m. I remember it, on a Saturday night, and we woke up the next morning and had 1 million views. And that's when we
Whoa,
had that
okay.
aha moment where we were like, okay, we need to start posting these YouTube shorts. And we were the first ones to get into the market on YouTube, and perfectly timed YouTube to compete with TikTok opened up a section of YouTube called YouTube Shorts. And then those videos, it has to be less than 60 seconds. That's the criteria. And it's just like TikTok. You can just kind of scroll through, and you don't have to search anything on a YouTube homepage. You just scroll and it popped up. And the algorithm being so complex and so smart, if you watch my video for a certain amount of time, my next video I post will be on your feed. And I think YouTube content creators will find this number very interesting. We had a video that had 140% retention rate, which means not only did the average viewer watch it 100% of the time, they actually rewatched it for about another 4/10
Really?
of the time.
No
And
way.
that video hit 15 million views.
Whoa. Okay. That's pretty crazy. I mean, I think that that's monetizable, like 50 fucking million views. I
Yeah,
happen to know
definitely.
that gambling and gaming is hot right now as far as it's on trend or it's rising currently in the YouTube market. It's good for that reason. That's really interesting. So did you make much money from that? I didn't even know about
Yes.
this.
Yeah, so a 15 million view short, you're gonna laugh, paid me under $1. 85
What?
cents around, because the
Well,
YouTube
fuck.
short, yeah, the YouTube shorts, the way that it works is, especially in the very beginning days, they had no advertisements around that part of their space, and now they do have ads, but it pays a very limited amount. But what you do is you leverage the views that you're getting, with brands, and then you put little watermark logos in the TikToks, and those TikTok's getting millions of views now are bringing eyes to the sponsors that wants to create it. So you aren't making money from YouTube itself, but you're really making it from the brands that you work with, which is why I say you have to put your entrepreneur hat on. You have to make some connections. I mean, people will email you, and we get hundreds of emails every month just from people trying to work with us. But you just have to kind of figure out which ones align best with your brand, who's going to pay the most, and most importantly, you have to know your value. So you have to understand that people will try to lowball you, but you say no. For me, it's worth 3,000, worth $5,000 to put you in one of my YouTube shorts. Like that's how the
Um,
game works.
I have a couple thoughts on that. This whole concept of know your value. It's actually kind of triggering for me. Um, but I would think, I mean, yeah, in business you really should, but I would think even more than that, you should even more valuable than that is actually being able to give a lot of value, right? But like that's the first step is give a lot of value. Then it's know your value, right? Because if you don't give any
Mhm.
value, you have no negotiation power, right? Um, and Yeah, I mean, just like I don't know, I hear it all the time, and it's like to me, it sounds like oh, you gotta like get max value all the time. But um, in my view, if someone came to me and lowballed me pretty hard from the beginning, I would think to myself, I don't want to do business with this person because they're gonna just keep trying to screw me over because that's basically what
Mhm.
it is, right? I mean, um, but I know in the real world, the way the real world works, you definitely have to be kind of sharp because probably I find it more. Have you found this to be the case? Much more in poker than in poker. In entrepreneurship, people really are a bit more scandalous than for some reason. I don't know what it is, but in poker, I just find that people aren't that scandalous.
Yeah, at this point, I have, an agent that kind of helps cipher through some of the BS. And I think that everyone that is a new entrepreneur is going to struggle with some of that. I do agree, especially because I don't know who is in charge of these like scammers and these people, these like fake brands that are trying to reach out. And what they're trying to do is just like, use your platform to promote or just like these fake companies. So I think that thankfully with the team of really, really smart friends, both of my friends I can't speak highly enough about because they're extremely intelligent individuals. One is an investment banker. The other one is a consultant at Bain, which is one of the top engineering firms in the country. I'm actually the only one of my group of three to take this full time, because they just kind of have jobs they couldn't pass up on. And my job, kind of like you were alluding to earlier, I never found like the great engineering job right out of college, even though I had a great degree, good GPA, all those things. Nothing was really coming, at least in the space that I was looking at, something that excited me or interested me enough to want to take a full-time position.
Hmm, it's interesting. I mean, it makes sense. A lot of the jobs are pretty generic, I would think. Um, okay. I mean, yeah, there's a ton of bullshit out there. I know that for a fact. I mean, there's tons of people with shitty brands, with shitty products, all kinds of shit. Do you agree with what I said, by the way, about being able to provide value? Because I think, like, I mean, do you find it easier to provide value, or easier or harder to provide value, or harder to know your worth? Because I think they're like two sides, like the two opposite, like,
I definitely think it's harder to provide value. And my dad talks about this all the time because I will tell him about all the deals that we get. And especially when the numbers started increasing, I was very excited to tell him about, what I was bringing in. But my dad would bring that, well, what are you giving to them? And the easiest answer was brand awareness. We talk about a brand in a million viewed video, like that's brand awareness. But the better metric for a lot of these companies is actual like conversion. So you tell them to go to this website, and how many people actually click that link, and how many people actually go and deep dive into what you're talking about. And that metric is highly important for estimating how much your video or your business is worth.
Yeah, I think like that's like the hard thing to actually get is to actually close, I think is the word in sales. Um, to get people to the conversion rate, something along these lines. And do you find this I do want to talk a bit about poker, but I have more thoughts on this.
Mhm.
Do you find it easier to pursue this avenue than poker? Because I mean, yeah, I mean you're a poker player, right? Like how's the actual poker grind going? And are you more natural of an entrepreneur or what?
I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, even as a kid. I never knew I wanted to be a poker player until 4 years ago. But I do find YouTube to be more lucrative. And in that ways, I do find it a little more interesting because I understand how competitive the poker space is. And although the poker YouTube space is starting to become more saturated, I actually believe there's a lot left on the table. And I believe that there's just an opening for a ginormous channel. And when you get hundreds of thousands of views, that's worth millions of dollars. And to make millions of dollars as a poker player, you got to be playing the highest stakes in the world. I have to sit across the table from you and try to figure out what hand you have and beat you. And I know how long and how hard you study and all the experience that you have. And as someone who I feel like I've got more YouTube and marketing experience than other people that are trying this, I feel like I have an edge in that sort, versus I'm still trying to figure out my edge in poker. I'm still working on that. I'm still working with my coach. I'm still very, I lack experience in actually playing high stakes poker.
Yeah, poker's I don't know. I feel like it feels like to me poker's fairly simple, but a big part of where your money in poker will come from, to be honest, has a lot to do with market research and just finding like the soft spots in market. It's like a business uh sort of skill set, I think. It's in the opposite direction as knowing what your worth is. I mean they're a bit related because you have to know that you're better than the field, but that's not that hard. What's difficult is to find like the soft spots in poker and just really hammer them home. And a lot of the times this doesn't mean being like the best player ever. It's almost like kind of bad to be the best player ever unless you really stand out, and like the payoffs of that are kind of strange. Um, but yeah, to make money in poker, it's like almost better to not even like, I mean, it's a weird learning curve just because it's really good to be really good at it, yes, but at the same time, it won't really make you money unless you really do find like a soft spot in the market. I would just think this is really relevant towards YouTube because you have to figure out what your niche is, which is sort of similar. It's like effectively a soft spot, but how does it align with you?
Mhm.
It sounds like your niche basically was like, what's your poker story, next gen poker. It seems like you're a pretty good storyteller too, from what I can see. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. I feel like storytelling is like the number one reason that people are able to build an audience, because once you have people hooked on your story, well, they're going to keep tuning in every week to see how that story's progressed. And especially someone like Rampage Poker, who started playing 1-2 at Boston Billiards to now playing the $1 million game of Hustler. Like that's a story that people want to tune into. So he's one of the guys who done a really good job at being consistent by just posting every step of his journey along the way. But even with people that are success stories like him, I still think there's a big opening in our niche for some really innovative content that I don't think people have really put the time into. And one of the things that I feel like the gap has been created is that the best poker content creators kind of post like the similar style of videos over and over again, when we're in a space where YouTube outside the poker niche is doing some really interesting, like unique thumbnails and storytelling methods that I'm going to bring into the poker space. And I feel like once I do that, then we'll be appealing to not just the 20,000 people that always watch, these poker videos, but actually appealing to the 500, 600,000 people that ended up watching my first YouTube video I made on my Frankie C channel.
That would be really cool. Yeah, if you find a way to actually appeal to a wider audience than whoever then whoever's just like the typical poker player, that's like a really big deal because much of the content out there just appeals to the typical poker player. It's like you have to know all the lingo and know what a three bet is, and you have to know what a check raise is, and some ranges and
Mhm.
all this stuff. If you manage to do that, that would be fantastic. Tough to do. Do you want to talk a bit about what you're thinking to do?
Yeah, I mean, just before I explain what I'm gonna do, one of the important things as a YouTuber is to know your audience. I would say that might be one of the most important things. People like to say, the YouTube algorithm, but replace that algorithm word with the word audience because what people want to see, the YouTube's gonna push. So, an example of my video being a success was I posted a video titled "If I lose this hand, I owe my opponent a date." And it wasn't the poker player that I was playing against that recognized me. He did recognize me, but it was actually his wife that was watching him play, who she was fangirling, like, oh my gosh, like I saw your video. I showed it to my daughter. She loved it. Can you go on a date with her? I was like, okay, settle down. And my idea behind this kind of uh it does dive into storytelling, but there's also just more about like idea creation and having like these big ideas that aren't just you're playing poker, but actually involving the poker community into doing really cool things. And the best way to get views is to make a video where people say, wow, I have to click on that. Like, I want to create videos where when you're scrolling through YouTube, it's like, what happened here? I have to know what happened here. And that's what I'm going to go for with every type of video that I'm doing. So, um, my next video, I surprised a random subscriber and I bought him into the $10,000 WSOP main event.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh, well, that was
telling
nice of
his
you.
story flying from Canada, and maybe this isn't the reason. Maybe this is one of the reasons I'm not quite a millionaire yet because I spent all of June playing 2-5 cash game. So I had people, follow into my journey as I played 2-5 every single day with the goal. And it's really important telling a story to have a starting point and have a eventual ending point so people can stay to the
Hmm.
entire videos end because retention rate is such an important metric on YouTube. So,
Yeah.
okay, the story is, okay, I'm trying to make $10,000. And if I make $10,000 playing 2-5, not some high stakes game, 2-5, then I will pick one of my subscribers into to play the main event. And that just checks so many boxes. First off, you want to be a subscriber so you can be involved. Second, you want to watch my story to see if I hit that 10,000 goal. And then all the mistakes and problems that come along the way. Like on day 9, I was down $3,000. Like that's what the story, you find the story once you start recording. I didn't know what exactly was going to happen, but once I started losing $3,000, like in the first 8 days, I really hammered that home. I really hammered my emotion, like how, upset you were, and you figure out your story along the way. So I think coming up with these titles, these headliners that you're like, wow, I have to watch that. And then once you start recording it, you'll find your story. And then post-production is just about piecing it together in a way that makes people watch to the very end.
Okay, that makes quite a bit of sense for how to tell a story. One thing you didn't really explain, and you don't have to, but you did, I mean, make the point that is what would sell is making people have to click on it, but you didn't talk so much about what it is that you do to make people really want to click on something. I mean, you don't have to if you got some secret uh YouTube information, but I'm curious. Like, what is
Uh,
this secret stuff that is making people click?
It's just I think of those ideas every day. It's not an actual secret, but I don't have anything that's like crossing my mind right now. But I just think that, like, especially with someone like you who has like this big badass poker presence, there's a lot you could play into with that. And me kind of coming from a different approach, someone's trying to like make a name for himself and build up. I think there's a lot more that I also can play into that character and just it's not about it's more about like how you can package yourself and how you can market yourself. It's not like a secret, but there is like this knowledge about YouTube that if you understand, then you can go viral no matter what. And I'm still looking for that knowledge. I just hired someone who cost $500 an hour every single hour to take a look at my videos and titles from the next 3 upcoming videos, and he's going to give me, what's wrong with all of them. And one example of this is I posted a video where I bought 10 dealers from my local card room into a tournament. I free rolled all of them. And then I did a last longer bet between them all. And the video, although I thought was great, didn't get many views. It got about a couple thousand on YouTube. And when I had this guy take a look at my channel, he explained to me right there, he explained why my video didn't go viral. Because my title and my thumbnail didn't explain to my audience clearly enough what the video is about. And if you're confusing your audience in the thumbnail and title, they're not going to click the video. So
Oh
really
yeah.
80% of the views on YouTube come down from your packaging and your marketing.
Yeah, yeah, I do know that. I mean, you need to be ultra clear, and also, I mean, yeah, like a big part of people's communication in general is actually a lot of crossover. I found as someone who's had to basically break down communication between people. A lot of, I mean, I still make tons of issues, have tons of issues because I wasn't like an expert at it. But there's a lot of crossover between that and actually communicating with people. It's pretty easy for people to not be clear when communicating, and there's all sorts of problems that arise because of that. Just this that one thing you reminded me of, but it makes a ton of sense. Yeah, and sounds like you gave a bit of an example. I was about to ask you for one. But how does that I guess that relates to you because you're an up and coming poker player, and this is part of your packaging because it is really generous of you to give away $10,000 if you're not like killing it. I mean, the more generous someone is more what they give in proportion to their net worth, not what they give. Well, I mean, it is that plus like it's a mix of factors, but like since you're trying to climb, and presumably aren't like super loaded, to give that away is quite nice of you.
Yeah, and I mean, I wasn't necessarily trying to be the nicest guy in the world. I was trying to tell an awesome YouTube story. But part of the awesome story, which I think will be kind of a funny tweet that I'm going to package later, is that I didn't have that much money in my bank account at the time I gave the ticket away. I had to switch some funds around and then get it and then go. So, I mean, it
Well,
wasn't,
that's the cool part.
I think
Huh?
that's like part of the fun part of the story. And I feel comfortable doing that, although most of my friends told me it was a terrible idea, because I really believe in the creation of this YouTube channel and that it's going to be very successful. Thankfully, I just had a $51,000 score in the main event. So actually paid over all that times five. So, good things kind of things happen for a reason. I had this video idea. I entered the main event last second and then ended up making this big cash. And now I've got two really awesome YouTube videos coming out where it'll be my one video where I buy the guy in, and my next video will be kind of an hour documentary of my entire 5-day run.
Okay, cool. Cool. It sounds like you kind of figured out what you're doing. Is there like how did you well, I have two questions. How did you go about, were you always a good storyteller? Because this is a skill that's actually quite a technical skill, but some people are much better at it than others, I've found. And it's people actually teach how to tell stories, by the way.
Mhm.
And secondly, another question is how did you figure out how to become an entrepreneur? Did you always have this skill set yourself, or what are some things that you did to have this sort of mindset to just like trying to figure things out and make things work?
Yeah, it definitely comes from my parents. My mom was an entrepreneur. My dad, although he did real estate development, it was kind of his own company that he worked with. He did everything on his own. So I feel it comes from my parents. I've always had a very strong mathematical background, but at the same time, kind of my skill that went undetected from my parents was my writing skill. I always was a great writer. I think that definitely dives into becoming a good storyteller. Because if you can write well, then you understand, how to establish the protagonist of the story and then finish like building up the point and then the climax. And really what's, I think, one of the most forgotten things on YouTube is leaving your audience with something, like asking for something more at the end of the video. I think most people, they do a good job of the hook at the beginning, but they forget that, you want to give your audience something at the very end that hits their emotions in some way, whether it's emotional, whether it's funny. It just needs to hit them. Maybe it's like they feel like sad for you, but whatever it is, you need to leave them with something, because that emotion will get them to come back the next video. And I definitely think that it's a skill that I've just been working on developing. You say people that teach stories. I know because I've watched TED Talks on storytelling. I've watched
Oh, really?
countless YouTube videos on storytelling. So it's really, you have to be first off aware that that is a skill. And then second, you have to actively pursue gaining the knowledge to be a better storyteller.
Yeah, yeah. There's even some details you didn't mention about storytelling that I learned as I was pursuing it. You really have to like. I mean, I wouldn't consider myself an amazing storyteller, but I am a good writer actually, which is weird. I think I know why. Um, why that disparity exists. I wouldn't. You're probably a better storyteller than me from what I've seen in the videos for sure. So you've got some storytelling kind of hooks in there really like make you want to watch more and see like, oh, this moment changed would change everything. Like writing
Yeah.
things like this that make it very make you think, oh shit, what's gonna happen? Damn it. Um but one thing is to I know that you're supposed to relate things to the audience a little bit, and also yeah, focusing on the emotions is very important as well. Um, People who are watching this may not appreciate these details, but now storytelling is becoming more and more of a. I think it's going to be more important in a lot of different fields, just because, or even in everyday communication, just because it's really hard to stand out unless you're a good storyteller. If you're like meeting people, um, and there's another thing you can like engage with humor and there's various different details. I looked into it a bit myself for various reasons, but really just for my interpersonal skills. Um, no, that's cool. I think both of those are much more important these days with actually making scalable money, just because um, most entrepreneurial jobs require a bit of both. And like I said, most things it feels like a lot of things these days do require some kind of interpersonal skills, and to be able to storytell does exercise a lot of those interpersonal skills that are required for entrepreneurship, which just requires to like at least go out and meet people or whatever.
I think that storytelling, it could be encompassing for a lot of like words that we hear all the time, like branding and promoting. If you
Mhm.
could, brand your company, well, it's kind of telling a story to the audience of why they should, purchase your specific product. And I really do like the poker niche, for a lot of reasons besides my love for the game. But this, one of the things, there's a lot of money in the poker space, but there's a lot of people, these like really rich companies who don't know how to market themselves and really brand themselves. And I feel like it's tough for any brand to really post an organic content that doesn't seem like they're just selling. Like, instead they pass that task on to people like me who really can tell a good story, and it feels more authentic coming from someone who's in it versus someone who's within the company. So that's why I feel like this niche is pretty awesome, because there's these huge companies that do awesome things that are just begging for someone like me to come in and tell a good story about their brand.
That's kind of interesting. I would think that huge companies would be able to solve this problem. I mean, like, there must be many branding specialists, but it makes sense that branding and storytelling are very similar. I could see that. It seems kind of complicated, though. I think branding is a far more complicated problem for all sorts of reasons.
Mhm.
I mean, like you have to figure out what your niche is and how to communicate to the audience. Like, how the do you do that? But I do think, well, why do you like poker so much as a narrative? Just because, is it just because there's lots of big companies that are trying to get into space and just don't know what the hell to do, or what?
Well, my poker story just came from the actual love of the two cards that dealt to me. And I remember being hooked from the very first time I ever played and immediately researching it, trying to get better. And I like the
Hmm.
personalities that I found right when I started, Googling YouTube. And Daniel Negreanu, of course, is one of the first names that come to mind when I was like first like looking at those poker personalities. And I think a good attribute to kind of our conversation right now is telling a video that has 15 million views, and not just a short form video, which is what I had 15 million views on, but a long form video. So to give perspective on a 15 million viewed video, like that's worth a lot of money. And that 15 million viewed video is Daniel Poker's best live reads. And that just kind of encompasses like all the different aspects that I think poker could like be. And people love the personalities that come along it. And just like there's, you know, internet trolling, internet beef, internet, all these things like bring eyes and attention. I believe that poker, because it is a competitive game, there's a lot of intricacies between the people that could bring eyes and attention and marketing, that I definitely see myself getting into later. But, you know, bottom line, like, why am I making poker related videos? Well, because this has been something that I just currently love doing. And the fact that I love doing it's going to make me make better YouTube videos about it. And I also do see myself, you know, eventually branding out to get outside the poker niche and kind of appeal to a larger audience. But at the same time, I do have big poker dreams myself. So we'll see kind of how far either YouTube takes me or poker takes me in which direction I go.
Well, there's still potential to succeed, especially in the YouTube star sort of route. I mean, poker, there's still potential in poker cash games as well, I think, but I don't personally understand. I'm actually going to look into this. I'm going to find ways to look into this. I don't personally understand how to ladder up from smaller stakes, but I roughly estimate what the process would look like. It should be quite a bit harder, but still feasible. I'm surprised you like the personalities so much. I think it depends on the personality. I do think Dino Negreanu and some of these star guys do have quite some good personalities. I think him specifically and Phil Hellmuth actually does, even though he's got a lot of you know, his poker skills questionable. He's got a lot of other positive attributes, frankly. Um, I mean, I feel like that was a pun. That was an accidental pun not intended. Um, yeah, I mean, there's some, but I feel like I don't know. I haven't been that impressed with the poker personalities, frankly, if I'm
As of
honest.
recently.
I've met people in other kinds of fields where I was really impressed. Actually, I mean that's actually one of the reasons why I moved to Hollywood or moved to Los Angeles, because even though it gets such a bad reputation, there's lots of very impressive people that are around this area. That I didn't even have to really. I didn't try because I would just inundate myself. But I yeah, I realized yeah, there's tons of basically really interesting people in that
I
area
just
and in
want to tell
arts
a
and
quick
things like this.
story about the
Sure,
people that play poker, and it's not nothing to
sure.
do with the people that are actually on TV right now that we know. But my mom, when I had this engineering consulting job, went full time with Next Gen Poker. There was a 2-3 month window. My mom was assuming that I was, you know, reaching out to new engineering companies, and like looking for an engineering job. But you know, I was just trying to do this full time, and I did just for her sake. I sent out about 100 applications, and I didn't even get a single response back. But when I was playing a 2-5 cash game at Aria, the guy to my right, who I just struck up a conversation with, was the CEO of a consulting firm, exactly for the type of job that I wanted. And he was playing a 2-5 cash game just for fun, but he was the CEO of a small consulting firm. And I was
Oh, okay.
like, this is kind of what I talk about. Like, this is sweet. I'm talking to a CEO right now, and I'm just playing a small stakes cash game.
Oh yeah, I mean that absolutely happens all the time. I mean, that's one of the cool things about poker is that it's sort of this melding pot of all different kinds of people. It really is like a universal kind of connector where well, first of all, like there's not so much nepotism at all in poker. It's like it equalizes quite fast in comparison to other fields. Whereas, like for example, politics, there's tons of nepotism, or a lot of businesses, there's tons of nepotism. But poker, there's not very little. There's very little. It's very it's close to meritocratic in many ways. Um, and yeah, I mean, you can pretty much sit next to anyone. I mean, much more so than in any other kind of industry. I mean, definitely the kinds of people that are interested in it can be very interesting. Uh, I even met a bunch of like artists and stuff like that playing, and
Oh yeah.
people that worked in all kinds of different fields. I found that to be cool. It was like a pretty good way to socially meet people without like, you know, get it going to a club or something. I mean, I found
Well,
house
and
parties to be really good too, but
I'm sure
huh?
celebrities and rappers would love to play with, you know, a poker personality like yourself. And, you know, you just being, you know, famous high stakes poker player, I bet that can like just open doors to people that just want to come play poker with you too. I don't know if you've experienced that.
I have, yeah, a decent amount. Yeah, I would say. I mean, especially when I was starting up or when I was beginning to become famous. Like I played with, well, I didn't play with Michael Phelps, but I met him, for example. I've
Nice.
met some other celebrities also, but not really. I met Emmett Smith and I'm trying to think who else. Um, for sure met others. I don't think I've met anyone super. No, I mean, depends. I mean, no one really. The people that were inspiring, to be honest, were more not usually the mainstream obvious celebrities, but usually the people like right beneath, in the middle or beneath them, sort of
Yeah.
more like the
B,
ones
C
that were
tier.
working really hard.
Hmm.
Not necessarily B or C tier, but more like people that are less well known that had to like really hustle to get where they were and
Okay.
don't necessarily have the biggest names. Usually the people who relied on names for some sort of superficial thing were not that impressive. But if they had to really cultivate it, then they were. That's my experience. But so it's always a bit of a mixed bag when you enter these circles
I
because
find that an
some really,
entrepreneur too. I find
yeah.
that when you work with people that have really built up their own companies, they have the most interesting personalities and stories.
Oh yeah, I've met quite a few of them. I found the entrepreneurs to be quite cool. I do think there's a decent amount of entrepreneurship in poker, but frankly, a lot of poker players, and I'm trying to change this, have a bit too what's the word? Like too rigid of a view on poker. For example, they'll have this idea of applying logic to like making the best play, and they'll study the shit out of these sims. Uh, or not actually. They'll study like the basic sizings or whatever, and just never, think to themselves, okay, well, you have to do something extra to get the value. Um, and so kind of stay in this box a decent amount. I think a lot of this is happening, but it's a double-edged sword because on one hand, I want one of the reasons I made this podcast was to expand on it, which I think you've basically done by becoming an entrepreneur, by the way. But at the same time, if people do expand on it, they would necessarily eventually become better poker players because this is exactly one of the flaws with many poker players is that they kind of sit too much in their little box and don't really push things beyond like becoming reasonable at certain things like pre-flop and post-flop, etc. Because all the values got to be almost by definition somewhere else. Like being reasonable only takes you so far, or being reasonable and being safe are pretty closely related, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. But the risk and the reward also has to be somewhere else out there.
As one of the best poker players in the world, do you find that one of the advice that I've been given a lot by very successful people and been actually lucky enough to sit down with dinners was billionaires, and they've told me, Frankie, you have to focus on one thing, and I've never liked that advice, but they've told me in regards to the YouTube channels that I own two different YouTube channels. I'm also trying to be a really good poker player as someone that is a really good poker player and also are doing the podcast and the other things they're trying to build and establish. What do you think about the advice where you have to focus on one thing? Or Frankie, you have to focus on just being a YouTuber, just being as good a poker player as possible?
I think it's a bit, well, I think they're mostly right, but I think it's a bit, what's the word? There's some nuance to it. For example, this is actually a good question. I've thought about this a lot. For example, I go to the gym every day. Should I now only focus on going to the fucking gym and getting in good shape? But no, because this would only take like a couple hours of my day or whatever. But what I should do is I mean, you can break this logic down further and say like, well, what about like walking to the gym? Is this like something? Should I only focus on getting to the gym? Like, no, like it's more complicated. Even within the gym, there's a million different things that you do, right? So this logic, on the whole, you can see that there's some issue here, and this logic on the whole, is actually pretty good. I would say it's like probably very good if we're going to oversimplify it. Probably perfect because if you have too many complicated tasks, then it becomes. And I've experiencing this problem quite a bit. It becomes a situation where you kind of overload yourself, especially when you're like trying to learn,
Mhm.
and you over complexify your situation, and that absolutely will like hold you back. I think it's definitely made my life complicated, but my goals are a little bit complicated also, so there's that. But if all you're doing is trying to make money, then basically pick like one. I would think firstly you would have to pick one thing to the point where it becomes not so complicated for you, and then you'd add on to something else. So probably what I would guess, but I would take my advice with a grain of salt, is you would focus on YouTube till you became really good at it, and then you'd focus on poker in like some kind of extreme way, is what I
Mhm.
think. At least if those were possible options, because sometimes there's not possible options too. Um, that's what I would think. But I would look at it a little bit with a bit more nuance and say, okay, well, you can't let your poker game go completely, right? You can't let your health go completely. So you'd like put in a certain amount of effort where it doesn't overwhelm you in those categories, and then focus all the other effort in somewhere else. I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this, but you put like, you put just enough effort in these other categories so that they don't fall too much, um and all the rest somewhere else. Be like something like a pro. I don't know, I can't think of the quite of an analogy, but I can think of video games where this makes sense,
Well, I
where
think
like,
that you gave a
huh?
great answer. I think you gave a great answer to it. And I do believe kind of on the fact where I don't accept the answer of doing one thing is the fact that, being a awesome, super good poker player, well known as a very strong player, I believe that's going to get more YouTube attention. I mean, if Jungleman does something, I think that people are going to want to watch just because they know you're a great poker player. And if Frankie C does something, well, I really have to get their attention with something that's going to be, they have to click on it because I'm not that well established poker profile personality just quite yet. And one of the things that I think that you should do is I think that I want to see like videos of you just, giving your honest feedback on some of the most viral hands that you've played. I mean, I've seen you
Okay.
and your hitting quads and your chariot, your Greek outfit. Like I want to hear, you talk about that hand, and I think that's a very viral video right there. So I think you should be adding that into your YouTube game as well.
What's really funny is someone was like off telling me I need to do this just for like their other website, which I'm supporting, to run it once, uh, precisely to give like some kind of feedback on some hand. So I need to do that. I'm kind of bad at doing. I should do that more. I do think, yeah, I feel like people just fall into these. From what I can see, people fall into some stereotypes really a lot. They don't think of themselves enough, I guess you could say. So there's that. So um yeah, thank you for that insight. I'll do that more. I
Yeah, I
was
want to
going to
see it.
start, but actually I remember the reason why I didn't do that. I keep like changing my strategy a lot. But I think it's smart actually, even though it doesn't look smart. It looks really stupid, but it's I think it's sound. One thing about this idea of making money is that many different focuses don't actually make much money. And it makes sense to refocus if that's what's important for your optimization towards the thing that does make money. For example, we'll say this isn't the case for you, but if the example was to make content, or let's just say hypothetically, you found that it wasn't very easy for you to like make much more money from branding, but all of a sudden there became an opportunity that you can make a shitload of money from poker, then it would make more sense for the switch from the strategy of focusing on whatever YouTube stuff and then focus on the poker stuff and then just keep the YouTube channel like floating a little bit to like
Mhm.
offside your focus somewhat. But that would make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, that
Like
makes
if
a lot of
imagine
sense.
imagine if like some soft game popped up, and this is realistic, this happens by the way, and it just popped up for like a month. For example, World Series, and this happens for me all the time, and I just like forget about everything else and then go to World Series. I just like kind of put everything on autoplay a little bit. Um, and yeah, and if you can make like, I don't know, like hundreds of thousands of dollars in this month, or whatever amount means a lot to you, then it makes sense to do such things. So this idea of picking one focus, I think it's like slightly imperfect, but like I don't have as much money as billionaires, so um yeah, it would make a lot. It would be. Let's give another analogy. Their analogy would be to like play the soft game for a really long time, like presuming you'd found it. And in poker, what I would be giving would be like, okay, well, the soft game doesn't necessarily exist, so you have to keep switching it. And if you have other priorities, you want to keep switching it too.
Yeah, and as someone who has, all these mixed games, and this is similar to what we're talking about, focusing on one, and a question that I really wanted to talk to you about, as you have to, study and, manage your time playing different mixed games and making sure your skill is optimal in each of these as you play a tournament like the PPC, where you have to play every single one to the best of your ability every time it's your turn. How does focusing on one thing change in your world?
Okay, so that's a good question. In the PPC is a bit of an exception, but I will say if you're trying to learn all the different games, you should focus on learning one game at a time, because learning them all while playing each of them, 8 times, the cycling through 8 times in a row, it requires much more discipline than focusing on one if you can, for
Mhm.
sure. And it requires it's a bit harder because you can't as naturally pick up patterns as you would if you played one game. Whereas if you effectively become like a specialist in each of the games, you no longer have these issues. And another thing is that the state of some of these games doesn't really change. So if you become pretty good at them, especially the limit games, it's not like you have to keep studying. As long as you remember the information, you like you're just kind of beating people for a long time. Like people don't really get better at like limit deuce to seven, for example. They don't get better at Ras, not really. They don't get better at Badugi. They actually have fucking sucked at Badugi for a really long time, and they still suck for the most part. Um, they don't get better at. I mean, they actually have gotten better at single draw specifically. I would say it's kind of strange. Um, they've gotten better at no limit. They've gotten better at PLO. But the mixed game players typically improve at a slower rate, precisely for the reason that they don't like focus on the games individually, or like bother actually, looking at what the science says versus the whatever their intuition says. I mean, I've seen the same stupid mistakes over and over, basically. So actually a lot of what I do, frankly, is just capitalizing over the same fucking mistakes over and over. And I generally don't study, and when I do, it's when I see that I need to, and then I apply myself. It's more like I'm very aware of if I'm missing something or not, which I think a lot of poker players lack.
So, do you have a
Those things
favorite
might seem
game where
counterintuitive.
you just
Huh?
do you have a favorite game where you just have, your knowledge where you kind of feel like, I'm just crushing this game. I don't need to study that. Kind of like you just understand that discipline more in the field right now. Is there any game like that
Well,
that stands out?
yeah, there are two games, and they're probably not what you expect. The first one's Badugi. Um, yeah, good luck with that. It's basically there's a really high barrier point. What's the word? Really high wall to becoming good at that game. A really high point barrier to becoming really good at mixed games, actually, I'd say. But it's possible. It's just tough and requires some luck, probably. The second one is deep short deck cash games. These games I found to be one of the most challenging to become very good at. Deep,
Hmm.
shallow is for the most part simple. There are a couple weird things about it, but there's not much edge shallow. Deep, however, there is quite an edge in cash games. Short deck and the barrier is very high because there's so much like subtle nuance in those games. And it's just very easy to fuck up in some kind of way. But the problem again, and it's a bit related, is that there's just not that much action in uh, deep short deck cash games. That probably I should be, if I found like a deep cash game that was even like 50 ante, I should probably drop whatever the I'm doing and just play that if I could like four table that, because I would probably make like something like 10K an hour. I made like 1 million in 1 week playing multi-tabling 50K ante or
Wow.
$50 ante or $100. I think it was $50 ante. Yeah. But it's I don't know if it's as easy these days. Maybe I ran super hot. I don't know. $5,000 buy-in.
That's crazy. No, that's really, really good. And I feel like, yeah, if you find that kind of like we were talking about earlier, if you find that game where you just have the huge edge, just play as much as you can and make your million.
Yeah, that is what I advise for the people that I teach, more so than becoming like extremely good at no limit. But if you do become extremely good at no limit, you'll absolutely crush, of course. It's just like the problem is that people, it's just not that easy, basically, for a couple of reasons. It's just too milked too hard, and there's too many people playing somewhat solid. You need to find the niche situations. So what are you playing anyway?
I'm playing almost exclusively a No Limit Hold'em. Besides the past 8 months to a year, I've been very interested in some mixed games, like 8 game mixed cash games, and I hosted one, and I would get the players that would be the perfect people to play with and besides just playing some like 2040 or 4080 of just some doogie, and then mixing in some kind of more of the more, I guess, gambly ones. When they do, it's Super Raz or or some other Texas style games, so where you don't have those games in the World Series like the Raz Ducey and some of the other ones
No.
that I do enjoy playing. But honestly, besides this little 6 month stint that I went into, it's almost exclusively no limit. And I kind of like I took the advice from the billionaire where I was like, okay, right now I've got this YouTube thing that I'm trying to focus on, and I'm also playing No Limit and trying to get better at that. I got one coach, and I was like, let me stick to this, get really good at it, and then I can kind of adjust and start focusing more on the mixed games because I do find that in my career that's going to be a big focus at some point, but right now it hasn't been.
Okay. Okay, cool. I mean, it sounds like you have a lot of potential for stories also. So
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
cool. So you're playing like 4080, that's like 1020? You 1020 no limit? Are you playing
Yeah,
1020 no limit online?
no, I almost exclusive play in person, between the stakes of 2.5, 10.20, somewhere in between that range.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it seems like you have potential for like that's like kind of getting to the point where you can get in some good spots. I don't know what the cash game streets really look like in like the lower stakes games. But maybe there's some really good situations kind of fumbling around.
Well,
That's what
it
I want
actually
to explore. Huh?
I actually was really interested when you brought up, kind of how or you were interested in how people, go up the stakes in a cash game, like how people rise up from 2.5 and 10.20. And my first answer to that was, well, you kind of have to, I guess, have what you believe is the minimum amount of money, your bankroll for each game before you're happy to move up. And the question that I really have for you as being someone who's so involved in like the high stakes poker community, is how is like the staking aspect, like in the poker world between the low stakes, mid stakes, and up to the highest stakes? How do you think that is currently? Are most of the players being staked at the highest stakes? If you have anything to elaborate about that.
I think most people, a decent amount of people, I think a decent amount of people are staked or they sell some pieces. It makes sense too because they're quite illiquid, the highest stakes. You don't want to like lose a huge amount and then move down. I mean, it's really mixed bag. Like online, I don't think people really are selling much. But if the games are liquid, I should say they're not selling much. They personally don't advise having 100% in a lot of games. This variance is usually higher than what people expect.
And then at the mid stakes level too, do you feel like that's a pretty viable strategy for trying to go up the ladder? It's a little different from me because I'm happy to sell action just for good content. So for me, I'll play a 25.50, I'll play a 51 just so I could get the YouTube video out of it, and I'll sell action. But I'm wondering for more of the, the mid stakes grinders who want to take the shots, how much staking is going on in that world?
So here's what I think. I think it's kind of simple. If there's a lot of liquidity, generally speaking, you do not want to be selling action. And generally speaking, it's not really a good sign if you are. I mean, there are exceptions, of course. Um, but if it's like an exceptional situation in that like you're not always playing those stakes, or if the game is soft, then you want to then it makes sense to start selling action, especially if it's like quite exorbitant and not very frequent. There's really only a limited number of situations that should be otherwise. But basically, I don't advise people to stake people at stakes that are very liquid. I wouldn't. I mean, I think it's a bad business proposition. If that, let's put it like this. Like for example, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to stake someone at like 5100 if the games at 5100 are tougher than the games at 2550, because they can just play 2550 or 1020 or whatever, right? Because like why do that? Or stake a player that's like trying to play 100 200 unless they like legit lost their whole money. Like why would they need the staking for that? Like they could just grind it up. If they can't grind it up, then they're not going to beat 100 200, right?
Mhm.
But if there's a soft game, or like the games are just huge or whatever compared to what the role is, and it's like somewhat reasonable, then sure. But it basically has to be an issue of liquidity and how soft it is.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know it's slightly different, but in the high stakes tournament element, I would imagine, and I have, started slowly building my connections with some of the best high stakes players in the world. It seems like there's a whole business in the markup and the selling and in the staking, where people start to play the highest 25Ks, 50Ks, sell at some markup, and really not take too much risk to play the highest games.
You can do that. Yeah, I mean, if you really want to. I don't believe in not taking much risk though. I don't like to, even as someone who's like a little bit too trusting, I no longer give out deals where the other person doesn't put up much risk. I don't think that's a good idea for business, because it's just too easy to like be like, "F it, I don't care," kind of
Yeah.
thing. Whereas if someone has their own, a lot of people just don't give a and they can say whatever. People say a lot of shit, and um, I mean, I just think it's important to like have some stake in the game. And really, in a lot of business situations, I think this is an issue too. Is that a lot of people have effectively like kind of cheated the system and like taken out their own personal stake. I just don't believe in this kind of way of dealing with things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I really resonate with needing both parties to feel at risk. That seems logical.
Yeah. Well, it's fair also. I mean, really the bottom line is like what's fair. I mean, it goes back to this negotiation example. A negotiation shouldn't be, in my opinion, one person trying to angle the other out of like more value. This is like basically an angle shot, right? It should be, this is what I think is fair. What do you think is fair? And then if you do that with people, then there are no more problems that arise. It's just, that this is the relationship. Now it's fair. Um, but if like someone's constantly trying to angle you in like business, or like someone's like angling in the first place, they're gonna just keep practicing that pattern and keep doing it. Well, what are your plans for the future? Content wise,
I'm
huh?
currently looking over 160 applications for new video editors. So for me, it's just trying to post as many high quality videos as possible. Consistency on YouTube's one of the things they like to see. A lot of videos quite often. At the same time, I'm playing a lot of poker and trying to get better in the game itself. I'm trying to build my bankroll in cash, and I think that being a better poker player is gonna help my content. So it's definitely a catch 22. And I really right now just want to be the biggest poker YouTuber. And I shouldn't even say the word poker. I want to be the biggest YouTuber. Like that's my goal. Like that's where Frankie C is trying to reach. And I just think that the answer to that because I believe I have the personality. I believe I have the storytelling. I believe that I have the entrepreneur vision. For me, I think it's just the knowledge that I haven't received yet in things like packaging, presenting the ideas on the thumbnails and titles. That's just knowledge that I haven't learned yet. And for me, it's never ending working towards gaining that knowledge, reading the books, watching the videos. And I think at some point, I'm 23 years old right now. I think at some point it's going to click here in the very near future where I think I'm just going to
Mhm.
skyrocket and just take over.
Yeah, I think from what I've seen, you seem to have those things. 23, you got a lot of time ahead of you too. I mean, it's not like you're doing a lot better than most 23-year-olds, that's for sure. Uh,
Thank you.
and you seem to be more knowledgeable than a lot of people even doing YouTube videos. More knowledgeable than me, in fact. And I think the YouTube and poker stuff can can I would think that it's sort of what's the word, that it does align a bit as well, because if you like travel somewhere and play some tournament or whatever, travel to like in Taiwan or whatever, or Mexico,
Exactly.
and like make a video, like probably people want to see if you do it right. I found it to be challenging, but I think there's potential there. Or in Barcelona, what about that? Go to Barcelona and
Exactly.
record some poker. Duh. Barcelona's
Yeah.
pretty cool. Um,
I already got a little 10-20 or a 5-10 cash game. And that's what I'm working towards right now because as myself, I'm a good editor. But with all the things that are going on in my life right now, all my goals, like I need someone to take that responsibility from me. I can't put
mhm.
40 hours into a video. That's a full work schedule. I can't do that. And I want to post videos everywhere I go. I'm going to 8 countries in the next 4 weeks. So that's what I want to make videos on. I don't think anyone's
That's
out
gonna be
here making
crazy.
videos in Barcelona. No one's making videos in Taiwan. No one's making videos in Korea. This type of
Hmm.
thing that I could do that's different than most people because I'm just fully into it. And I think that I could post content where no one's ever been. And that's where I feel like I'm going to gain my edge. I just need somebody who is understanding of storytelling to become my editor because I fired 4 people in the past 6 months. And they have to be able to give me the videos with a reasonable time.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that seems like there's a lot of potential there. Anyway, yeah, I'm looking forward to your success. Anything else you'd like to add before we get off?
Yeah, I just have one question for you. And I wrote this one down. Are there any points in your career that you doubted yourself, and how did you get through
All the time.
it? Really?
Um, well, here's how I look at that. I mean, doubts are, necessarily one of these like things that, I mean, no matter, in this case, we can actually put doubts in sort of a box of like whether you're good enough or not. And at the other side of success, like it's kind of like in this specific case, especially, they are in fact, like you can say they're essentially like a limitation, whether there's truth in them or not, because in the long run, there's not truth. The long run meaning like if your life extended forever, they're simply temporary, right? Because like the more effort you apply, um, the more likely you'll find something, some kind of edge to get past them, et cetera, et cetera. So there is that. I mean, obviously the risk of like ruin, et cetera, is real. I mean, you have to stay away from that. How I dealt with that, I eventually realized that. I've been realizing that now lately as I struggle with things that are a bit bigger than poker risk, and I've been having issues that, at least in my mind, seem more insurmountable. Uh, the way to actually practically deal with them is to defocus a little bit, to do something that's a little bit more relaxing. That helps some, not to do it too much because then you don't face it. If the basically you want to make sure that your stress level is not so high that you become dysfunctional.
Mhm.
In which case, that's when comfort becomes a good thing, because usually there's many different paths that you're taking, and that often some paths will go much better than others just because of whatever reasons. So you focus on those ones and not put as much energy into the ones, unless there's like immense upside, to the ones that aren't moving very far. So I'd put it like, I would say it like that. It's a mix of all those things. So I give you the theoretical perspective, which is the doubts themselves are essentially limiting beliefs, or essentially limited or temporary, however you want to look at them. Um, whether you can do it or not. Because let's put that another way, is that whether you do it or you cannot, the more that you believe that you can do something, the more you can actually do it, right? So it almost like makes sense to not even think about that too much, whether you can do it or not, because it's kind of a waste of time, and just simply like keep being in the state of trying to complete your goal. That would probably be the most zen answer. And then on the practical side, I gave some tools to actually deal with those emotions.
I like that
Is that
answer
a
a
good
lot.
answer?
Yeah, I like that answer a lot.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Well, it's great talking to you and great exploring your world. Best of luck and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much
Do
for
you want
having
to
me.
promote anything? Your channel?
Yeah, go
Frankie
check out
C
Next
on
Gen
YouTube?
Poker. Check out Frankie C on YouTube. I got some really awesome high quality videos coming out. I'm sure you'll be entertained, and I promise you that if you subscribe, you have a good chance of being featured or maybe even winning something in the future. So make sure to subscribe, and thank you so much for having me on. I had a great time talking to you.